He came to town with nothing but a faded jacket, an old photo, and a silence that hid 1,000 untold battles. Nobody knew his name. Nobody cared, until 3 men made the mistake of pushing him too far. And a single act of quiet courage began to change everything. If stories like this move your heart, we invite you to stay with us until the very end. And if you feel inspired, subscribe to Soul Moment Story, where we bring you powerful tales of kindness, healing, and second chances. Now let's begin. The Texas sun had begun its slow descent, bleeding warm hues of orange and gold across the wide open sky. Shadows stretched longer over the cracked pavement, and cicadas buzzed lazily from somewhere behind the old chain-link fence that marked the edge of town. The bus stop sat quietly along a dusty roadside just off the main street, its bench flaking paint, its glass shelter smudged by time. A man sat alone on that bench, tall, lean, with shoulders that still carried a soldier's posture, despite the worn fatigue jacket he wore. His name was Ethan Walker. His boots were scuffed, his jeans slightly faded, and his hair, longer than military regulation ever allowed, brushed gently against his collar in the breeze. He looked like a man who had walked a long way, not just miles, but years. In his lap rested a frayed leather backpack, softened with age and use. Tucked carefully inside was a single item he checked at least once every hour: a small photograph of a girl with sun-bright hair hugging a floppy-eared dog on a California beach. Lily, his daughter. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in almost 5 years. He stared out toward the horizon, his eyes not just watching, but waiting, as if searching for something only he could see. A screen door creaked open from the small diner across the road. The jingle of a bell followed, light and familiar, as a waitress stepped outside holding 2 to-go coffees. Her name tag read, Sarah, and her smile was gentle, like the breeze after a storm. "You still waiting on that bus?" she called out playfully, stepping off the porch. Ethan turned, caught off guard by her voice. "Yeah," he replied with a nod, his tone low but kind. "Late again. Story of this town," she said, crossing the street with ease. She offered one of the coffees. "I figured you could use something warm." Ethan hesitated. "You didn't have to." "I didn't," she said, her smile never leaving her face. "But you've been sitting out here 3 evenings in a row. Figured you either love our sunsets, or you're running from something." Ethan accepted the cup. Maybe both. She laughed softly, leaning against the pole next to him. "You're not from here." "No. You passing through?" "Trying to get somewhere I should have gone a long time ago," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah studied him for a moment, the deep lines around his eyes, the distant way he spoke, the rigid stillness in his body like a man trained never to flinch. "Military?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately, then simply used to be. There was no pride in his tone, no bravado, just a quiet weight that settled in the air between them. Sarah didn't press. From down the street, the familiar sound of motorcycles rumbled closer. 3 bikers rolled into view, their engines loud, their laughter louder. The lead rider popped the clutch, revving as they neared the diner. "Trouble," Sarah muttered. The trio parked with dramatic flair, swaggering into the diner like they owned the place. Ethan watched them calmly through the bus stop glass. His posture didn't change. His breathing didn't quicken. Sarah glanced back at him. "You'll be all right. I've been through worse," he said. But his fingers closed tighter around the coffee cup. Inside the diner, voices rose. The bikers were loud, laughing too hard, ordering with the entitlement of people who mistake volume for authority. One of them, tall, tattooed, with mirrored sunglasses still on indoors, pointed toward the bus stop and laughed. Ethan didn't move. Moments later, one of the bikers, Troy, by the patch on his vest, sauntered out with a grin. "Hey, soldier boy," he called across the road. "You miss your war or something?" Ethan sipped his coffee. "Said nothing. You look like you crawled out of 2003, Troy added, laughing to himself. Sarah turned toward Ethan, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything." "I won't," he said softly. Troy waited for a reaction. Got none. He smirked, then spat on the road and went back inside. Sarah let out a long breath. "I should get back." "Thanks for the coffee," Ethan said. As she started to cross the street, he called after her. "Sarah." She stopped, surprised he knew her name. He pointed gently to the name tag on her apron. "Just thanks for the kindness." She smiled again, softer this time. "Be careful, Ethan." The sky darkened as the first stars began to pierce the twilight. The wind picked up, tugging gently at Ethan's coat. He leaned back against the shelter, one leg crossed over the other, the photo of Lily tucked safely into his inside pocket once again. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. But something inside him stirred, the way old instincts awaken when called, not from ego, not from pride, but from something deeper, a sense of watchfulness, of restraint, of someone who had seen storms far worse than taunts from drunken bikers, and who knew that the most dangerous men were always the quietest. The bus didn't come that evening. It didn't matter. Because Ethan Walker wasn't just waiting for a ride, he was waiting for a second chance. And just across the street, fate had already started moving. The bell above the diner door jangled violently, not from a gentle push, but the kind of shove that announced a need to be noticed. The warm murmur of forks against plates and low conversation froze mid-motion, as if the entire room took a breath and held it. 3 men stepped in, not casually, not humbly, but with the deliberate swagger of people who had long ago mistaken intimidation for personality. Troy, tall with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, led the pack. His mirrored sunglasses were still on despite the indoor lighting, and his leather vest, sleeveless unzipped, bore the emblem of a local outlaw motorcycle crew, a howling wolf against a crimson moon. Behind him came Kyle, wiry and twitchy eyes darting like a crow's, and Mason, the broadest of the 3, dragging his boot heels like he owned the floorboards. They smelled of beer gasoline and the kind of arrogance that turns loud when bored. The waitress Sarah had just returned behind the counter, refilling a pot of coffee. She paused, hand on the carafe, as the trio made their entrance. She forced a smile, polite, professional, but her knuckles whitened around the handle. "Hey, sweetheart," Troy said, walking straight to the counter, dropping into a stool without asking. "Miss me?" "You were here 2 nights ago," Sarah replied evenly. "Time flies when you drink good coffee," Troy said. Winking, he slapped the counter twice. 3 coffees. "Make it fast. We got a ride to finish." Sarah nodded, pouring the cups in silence. The other 2 men found their seats like they were auditioning for a scene, boots up elbows. Wide, loud chuckles over nothing. Outside the diner's window, Ethan remained still at the bus stop. He hadn't moved from his position, but from his angle, he could see the reflection of the men inside through the window's glare. He watched not with suspicion, but with the kind of patient attention a father gives to a child having a tantrum. Back inside, the bikers had turned their attention from caffeine to commentary. Kyle tapped the laminated menu with a dirty fingernail. "Check this out," he sneered. "Who the hell charges $3 for eggs in a town with 1 traffic light? Maybe she charges extra for the view," Mason muttered, glancing toward Sarah with a leer. Troy chuckled. "Or maybe she's just into broke soldiers waiting for ghosts." Sarah stiffened. Troy swiveled on the stool, gesturing broadly toward the window. "Hey, what's the deal with Captain America out there? That guy waiting for a bus or a parade?" "Let it go, Troy," Sarah said softly but firmly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice but raising its weight. "You sweet on him or something," I said. "Drop it." The diner quieted. Even the cook in the back paused mid-sizzle. Small towns have their rhythms, and everyone knows when something shifts. But Ethan, still at the bench, hadn't so much as flinched. Troy stood taking his coffee cup with him. Maybe he needs a real welcome. He started toward the door. Sarah stepped between him and the exit. "You take one step out there, and I call Sheriff Reed's," she warned. Troy smiled the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "Don't worry, darling. I'm just being neighborly." Kyle and Mason followed, laughing, and the door slammed behind them as they exited. Sarah watched them go, heart pounding in her chest. Out at the bus stop, the sky had grown dimmer. Streetlights flickered into life, casting long, golden pools of light that danced with passing moths. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. The reflection of the approaching bikers grew larger in the diner glass, but he did not look at them directly. He waited. Troy reached the edge of the bench and stopped towering just a few feet away. "Evening," he said mockingly. Ethan glanced up. "Evening. You waiting for the bus or just collecting dust?" "Just resting my feet." Troy squinted. "You from here?" "No." "Good," Troy said, nodding. "'Cause I'd hate to think a town this boring raises people like you." Kyle snorted. "Look at that jacket." "Vietnam surplus." "Not quite," Ethan said. Army Mason asked, circling behind the bench. Ethan didn't answer. "Must have been," Troy said. "Only Army guys sit that stiff. You're not Air Force. You don't look soft enough." Ethan set the coffee down slowly. His hand brushed his sleeve, the fabric worn and soft, and with a quiet roll, he pushed it up to his elbow. There, just barely visible beneath the edge of his rolled sleeve, was the upper curve of a tattoo, a trident wings and a flintlock pistol, the unmistakable crest of a Navy SEAL. The bikers paused. Troy leaned in. "That's supposed to impress me?" "No," Ethan said plainly. "It's not for you." There was a strange silence, not tense, not loud, just a stillness that seemed to press on the air itself. Kyle shifted uneasily. Mason swallowed. Troy scoffed, but there was a crack in his smirk now, like a mirror starting to splinter. Ethan stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for anything, just stood slowly, fluidly, like a tide returning to shore. "I don't want trouble," he said. Troy stepped back half a pace. "Then don't start any." Troy snapped, but it sounded more defensive now. Ethan's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You have a choice," he said calmly. "Walk back to that diner, finish your coffee, or keep pushing and see what happens when a man runs out of patience." The words weren't a threat. They were a forecast. Troy clenched his fists, then looked away. "This town's gone soft," he muttered, turning. "Come on, let's go." Kyle and Mason followed, quieter now. As they walked away, Ethan turned and sat again. He didn't watch them leave. He didn't need to. From across the street, Sarah stood at the window, her eyes wide with something more than relief. The diner had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Plates clinked softly. A country song murmured from the vintage jukebox in the corner. Booths were half filled with regulars, truckers, 2 retirees playing cribbage, a young mother feeding a fussy toddler. Life, as it often does in small towns, was quietly folding itself into routine again. But not for Sarah. She wiped down the counter with a practiced hand, though her mind was far from the task. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the man across the street, toward Ethan Walker, the stranger who never raised his voice, yet made 3 grown bikers back off with just his presence and a few quiet words. She had seen cocky men, loud men, violent men, but never someone like him. The bell above the door jingled again. She turned, expecting a customer. Instead, it was Troy. He returned alone, his swagger thinner than before, but his temper shorter. His jaw was tight. He moved to the counter, slammed himself onto a stool, and picked up his lukewarm coffee without a word. A twitch in his fingers betrayed his mood. Kyle and Mason stayed outside, pacing near the bikes, smoking. Sarah said nothing. She poured a fresh pot behind the counter, deliberately not offering him a refill. Then the door opened again. Ethan walked in. He moved without bravado. Just quiet steps, worn boots brushing the tiled floor. He carried himself with a calm most men tried to fake. His jacket was still damp from the evening air. He nodded once toward Sarah, then toward the empty booth in the corner, as if asking silently if it was free. She gave the slightest smile and a nod. "Go ahead." He sat, hands folded on the table, not to provoke, not to challenge, just to be present. Troy noticed. His nostrils flared, but he stayed on his stool. Sarah brought Ethan a mug of coffee. This time, she didn't charge him. She simply placed it down in front of him and whispered. On the house, Ethan offered a simple, genuine, "Thank you." As she turned to leave, the sound of a cup dragging harshly across the counter cut through the calm. Troy had pushed his cup away and stood. Slowly. Deliberately. He walked over to the sugar stand, grabbing a handful of packets. But instead of walking back, he pivoted toward the table next to Anna, the young waitress in training barely out of high school, who had been quietly clearing dishes. Without warning, he dumped the sugar packets onto the tray in her hands, sending silverware clattering to the ground. "Oops," he said, grinning. "Clumsy me." Anna flushed, embarrassed. "Pick it up," he added. She knelt to gather the utensils. That's when Troy reached for the nearby coffee pot, still half full and steaming on the service station. His hand gripped the handle and tilted it slightly toward the girl. Sarah's voice cut sharp through the room. "Don't." But Troy's smirk widened. In one fluid motion so fast that only the aftermath was visible, Ethan was standing beside him, hand firmly around Troy's wrist, stopping the pour midair. A single drop of coffee hung on the edge of the pot, never falling. The room froze. Troy spun around, startled. "Get your damn hand off me." Ethan didn't squeeze, didn't twist. He simply held steady, firm, immovable. The silence in the diner became a force in itself. "You're angry," Ethan said quietly, his voice low but clear. "But you're not angry at this girl. You're angry because you backed down earlier, and your pride's stinging. I get it. But don't hurt someone who's just doing her job." Troy tried to jerk free, but the grip only tightened slightly enough to send a sharp warning up his forearm. "You don't know who you're messing with," Troy hissed. "I do," Ethan said. "You're not the first loud man I've met who used noise to cover fear." And then it happened, a subtle shift in body language that only trained eyes could spot. Ethan's left arm bent, guiding Troy's wrist downward, forcing him to lower the pot, back onto the station gently, without spilling a drop. His other hand came up not to punch, but to press lightly against Troy's shoulder. The movement was smooth, precise, practice disarming without violence. It was the kind of control only taught in elite training, the kind that doesn't aim to win a fight, but to avoid one before it starts. Troy looked down at the trident tattoo, now fully visible as Ethan's sleeve had shifted, and for the first time he understood. SEAL. Not just some soldier, not just a man with a story, but someone trained to end chaos in the deadliest of ways, and who now chose not to. Troy's bravado crumbled. He stepped back, almost stumbled. "Crazy bastard," he muttered, and stormed out the door, brushing past Mason and Kyle. Silence lingered in the diner for another beat. Then conversation cautiously resumed. Sarah approached slowly, heart racing. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I did," Ethan replied. "He was going to burn that girl. But you didn't hit him. You didn't yell. Ethan sat again this time with a slight tremble in his fingertips. The adrenaline was still there, humming beneath the surface. "I've learned something," he said, staring into his coffee. "Sometimes, the strongest thing a man can do is not fight." Sarah sat across from him, not as a waitress now, but as a woman trying to understand a man built of quiet storms. "Who taught you that?" Ethan looked at her, a sadness flickering behind his eyes. "My daughter," he said, "though she doesn't know it." The rain had started as a whisper, a soft tapping on the diner's windows, before gradually swelling into a steady rhythm that drowned the hum of the jukebox. Outside, street lamps cast golden halos through the mist, blurring the edges of the world into watercolor. Inside, the diner had emptied out. Only Sarah, Ethan, and the teenage waitress Anna remained. The coffee pot hissed one final sigh before falling silent. Ethan stood slowly, his jacket now resting on the back of the booth. The tension that had once surrounded him like armor had softened. But there was still something in his posture, a heaviness not from fear or pain, but from memory. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his wallet and set them gently under the coffee cup. "You don't owe me anything," Sarah said, watching him from behind the counter. "It's not for the coffee," he replied. She tilted her head. "Then for what?" Ethan offered the faintest smile. "For the quiet. It's a rare—" He reached for his jacket, slinging it over his shoulder. As he turned to leave, something slipped from the inner pocket, a small, weathered photograph. It fluttered to the floor like a feather. Sarah bent to pick it up before he could. The photo was old, but well preserved. A little girl no older than 5 or 6, holding a scruffy dog in her arms, both of them grinning against the backdrop of a beach at sunset. Sarah's voice was gentle. "She's beautiful." Ethan looked away. She was always fearless, smarter than I ever was. "She yours?" He nodded, eyes distant. "Her name's Lily." Sarah took a small step forward. "You talk about her like she's not around anymore." Ethan hesitated. "She's still here. Out west. I haven't seen her since—" He stopped, the words catching like a stone in his throat. 5 years. Sarah handed the photo back but didn't speak. "She doesn't know where I am," he continued. "And I'm not sure if she'd want to." "That's not true," Sarah said softly. "I don't even know her. And I know that's not true." Ethan folded the photo carefully, tucking it back into his inner pocket with practiced reverence. She was 5 when her mother died. Car accident. I was overseas. Missed the funeral. Missed her first day of school. Missed her growing up. Every phone call became shorter. Then they just stopped. Sarah's eyes softened. And now I'm on my way to see her, if she'll have me. He looked out toward the rain. It took me too long to admit that being a soldier was the easy part. Being a father, that's the real battlefield. Outside, the rumble of a bus engine cut through the night. Sarah glanced at the clock. "Is that your ride?" Ethan nodded. "Last one tonight." He turned toward the door, then paused. "I'm not used to talking." "Not like this." Sarah smiled. "You're doing just fine." He took a breath, as if trying to say something more, something important, but instead nodded once and pushed open the door. The rain greeted him with cold fingers. He stepped into it without flinching. Sarah watched from the window as he walked toward the bus stop, the same bench he'd sat on the past 3 nights. But this time, there was something different in his gait. A purpose. A weight lifted, even if just slightly. Then just before boarding, he stopped. He bent down slowly, deliberately, and picked something up from the ground. In the glow of the street lamp, she saw it, the photo fallen again, damp at the edges, but not ruined. He held it in both hands, staring at it for a long moment. Then, in a moment, so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, he smiled just a little. The kind of smile that hurts behind the eyes. The kind that says, "I'm scared, but I'm going anyway." It hissed doors folding shut behind him and pulled slowly away into the rain. Sarah remained at the window, arms crossed gently over her chest. She wasn't sure why her throat felt tight or why her chest ached a little. But something about that man, the way he moved, the way he carried grief like a shadow, lingered. Anna walked up beside her. Was he really Navy SEAL? Sarah nodded slowly. Yeah, but I don't think that's the most impressive thing about him. What is then? Sarah kept her eyes on the road, the red taillights of the bus disappearing into the mist. He's trying. Anna looked confused. Sarah clarified. To come back, to be better, to find something worth holding on to. Most people don't even try. She turned back to the counter, flicking off the coffee machine, her fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, but a part of her, deep and quiet, hoped she would. The bus rumbled down the wet road, windshield wipers swaying like a tired metronome, sweeping away the memory of rain with each pass. Inside the cabin was dim, softly humming, lit only by a few yellow reading lights. Most passengers kept to themselves, headphones in heads, nodding against windows, breaths fogging up the glass. Ethan sat near the rear window seat, his damp jacket folded across his lap. His gaze wasn't on the road, but on the small photo he held between two fingers. The one of Lily clinging to a sandy-haired dog frozen in joy by a sunset. Gone. 5 years. He traced the edge of the photo with his thumb. His heart wasn't loud, but it was heavy, the kind of weight that didn't announce itself, just lived quietly in the chest like a tenant that refused to leave. The bus slowed as it approached a blinking intersection. There was no one on the road, no buildings in sight, just mist curling up from the asphalt, pine trees lining the shoulders, and puddles reflecting the low sky. Then, a flash of headlights. 3 motorcycles roared past the bus on the shoulder engines, howling tires, spraying arcs of dirty rainwater. One of them slowed deliberately in front of the bus, weaving just enough to force the driver to tap the brakes. The bus jerked. Ethan didn't react outwardly, but his hand slowly slipped the photo into the inside pocket of his jacket. The driver cursed under his breath. Idiots. Outside, the bikes peeled off the road and into a gravel lot ahead, an old service station long abandoned. Faded signage hung like a ghost of commerce past. As the bus passed, the bikers stood there, waiting Troy, Kyle, and Mason helmets, off cigarettes glowing. And then, the bus driver pulled over. Ethan's head turned slowly. Why are we stopping? The driver need to check it. He reached for his flashlight. Sit tight. Ethan watched him step into the rain. Out the window, Troy was already walking toward the bus. Trouble didn't always scream. Sometimes it just waited for you to get off the bus. The doors hissed open, and Troy stepped in like it was his living room. He scanned the rows until his eyes landed on Ethan. There he is, he said, a grin spreading like oil. Didn't think we'd let you leave without saying goodbye, did you? Passengers turned uneasy. Kyle and Mason climbed in behind him. The bus driver shouted from outside. You can't! I'm just visiting an old friend, Troy called out. 2 minutes. Ethan stood, but not quickly. He took his time folding his jacket, placing it over his seat. When he rose, his shoulders moved like tidewater, slow, patient, deep. I thought you boys might have learned something, Ethan said. Voice, even almost soft. Mason sneered. We did. Learned you're a ghost. A nobody trying to play soldier. Kyle stepped closer. We read that tattoo real good this time. Navy SEAL, huh? That's supposed to scare us. Ethan didn't move, but the air around him tightened. "Let's take a walk," Troy said, tapping the side of the bus. "Wouldn't want to upset the other folks." A woman in the front row leaned toward the aisle. "Is everything okay?" Ethan turned to her and gave a nod that somehow said, "Thank you, and don't worry all at once." Then he stepped down into the rain. The gravel lot behind the station was wide open, surrounded by silence and pine trees. The bus lights cast a soft glow muted by mist. Rain drizzled now, less of a downpour, more like a hush over everything. Troy lit a cigarette with a slow drag. "You think you're better than us?" Ethan stood calmly. "I think you're angry, and you're looking for someone to bleed for it." Troy's face darkened. "You humiliated me in front of her. You did that to yourself." "He talks like a shrink," Mason chuckled. "Let's see how he fights." But Ethan didn't raise his fists. Instead, he spoke calmly, clearly. "This is your moment. You've got your numbers. You've got your stage. But you don't know what kind of man I used to be." He took a step forward, not threatening grounding. "You think I'm afraid of pain, of getting hit? I've bled in places where nobody would find the body. I've buried friends who never got to say goodbye. And I came home to an empty house and a child who barely remembered me." His voice cracked just slightly, but it didn't make him weak. It made him real. "I'm not looking for a fight," he said, taking one more step forward. "But I won't back down from one either." For a moment, the rain was the only sound. Then Troy pulled something from his pocket. Not a knife, not a gun, but something shiny and small. He tossed it at Ethan's feet. A laminated photo. Lily's photo. Dropped again. On purpose. Ethan looked down, then slowly, deliberately knelt. He picked it up with 2 fingers, wiped it gently against the inside of his shirt, careful not to smear the ink. His eyes lifted, and they changed. Not rage, not hate, but something deeper. Focus. And in the space of 3 seconds, Kyle lunged. Ethan pivoted, sidestepped, and used Kyle's momentum to slam him into a fence post. Mason charged. Ethan ducked, swept his leg, dropped him into a puddle with a splash. Troy froze, fists clenched in decision flickering behind his eyes. Ethan stood upright, breathing steady boots planted like roots. He walked toward Troy slowly. "I'm giving you a gift," he said. "You don't deserve it. But I'm giving it anyway." Troy took a shaky step back. "This didn't happen," Ethan said. "You were drunk. It was raining. You slipped. That's the story you're going to tell." "Why?" Troy hissed. "Why let me go?" Ethan looked at the photo in his hand. "Because I've seen what revenge turns people into, and I'm done being that man." He turned, walked back toward the bus. Not one of them followed. The night had deepened. By the time Ethan stepped off the bus, the rain had thinned to a fine mist, glistening like cold breath on the blacktop. The roadside was empty. The town had long fallen into silence. But he knew the stillness was a lie. Some things didn't settle easily. He adjusted his backpack, tightened the strap. Lily's photo now carefully sealed in a plastic sleeve. Sarah had slipped him back at the diner, was safe in his jacket's inner pocket, close to his heart. He took a slow breath, then began the walk down the shoulder toward the next motel. A pickup truck idled in the distance. Headlights dimmed engine, rumbling low, like a growl in the throat of a dog that hadn't yet decided whether to bite. 3 silhouettes leaned against the hood. Ethan didn't need to squint. Troy. Kyle. Mason. Again. This time they weren't laughing. This time they weren't drunk. They were waiting. He kept walking. They stepped forward. No crowd, no audience, no escape. "You should have stayed gone," Troy said flatly. Ethan stopped. Rain beaded on his shoulders. "I did stay gone," he said. "You're the ones chasing ghosts, Mason cracked his knuckles. "You made us look weak. You did that yourselves." Troy stepped closer. "This ain't about ego anymore. It's about respect." Ethan looked at him, not angry, just tired. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you give. "You think you're better than us?" Kyle snapped. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he bent down slowly, not defensively, not afraid, and picked up something from the wet asphalt. Lily's photo. It must have slipped fallen when he adjusted his pack. Now it was face down in a shallow puddle mud, seeping toward the edges, the ink starting to blur. He lifted it gently, brushing the surface with his thumb, trying to clean it. His breath caught. She was still smiling in the photo, but the dog's ear, something shifted inside him. Not rage, not impulse. Resolve. He looked up, and that's when it happened. Troy stepped forward and slapped the photo out of Ethan's hand. The sound was soft paper hitting water, but it echoed like thunder in Ethan's chest. For the first time, he moved fast. He didn't roar, didn't warn, just acted. In less than 3 seconds, his right hand snatched Troy's wrist, twisting it backward, sending the man to his knees with a grunt. His left elbow pivoted into Mason's sternum just hard enough to knock breath from lungs without breaking bone. As Kyle lunged, Ethan stepped into him, used his momentum, and with a sharp turn, swept the biker's legs out from under him. 3 men. Down. Not one blow wasted. Not one action cruel. Troy looked up from the ground, gasping. "What the hell are you?" Ethan stood still, breathing evenly. "I'm a man who begged for peace," he said, and got cornered instead. He crouched beside Troy, not in anger, but in clarity. "You crossed a line," Ethan said quietly. "Not because you hit me, but because you disrespected my daughter." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Troy looked away. Ethan stood again and turned to leave, but then paused. He stepped back, reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small, metallic, and blinking faintly blue. He held it between 2 fingers. "I placed this in your jacket," he said to Mason. Back at the diner. Mason's face went pale. "What a GPS tag," Ethan said. "Waterproof. Can't be detected without a scanner." Kyle blinked in confusion. Why Ethan tucked the device back into his jacket. Because I had a feeling, and I used to trust my instincts. From the distance, faint siren lights flared across the horizon, red and blue flashing slowly, growing stronger. Ethan turned to Troy one last time. "They'll find things in your truck, packages you weren't careful enough to hide. Or maybe someone tipped them off." He didn't smile. He just walked away. The 3 bikers lay in the rain, too stunned to move, too cornered to lie. A moment later, 2 sheriff cruisers pulled up tires, skidding on the wet road, doors slamming open. "Hands where I can see 'em," the deputy shouted. Ethan kept walking. He didn't need thanks, or glory, or even an explanation. He just wanted one small corner of the world to be quiet again. Later that night at the motel, he sat on the edge of the bed. Lily's photo dried under a reading lamp. The ink was damaged, but her smile had survived. He stared at it for a long time, then pulled out his phone. For the first time in years, he typed a number. It rang. 3 rings. 4. Then a young girl's voice answered, cautious but clear. "Hello." Ethan's throat tightened. His chest felt full and hollow all at once. "Hi, Lily," he said, barely above a whisper. A pause. Then he closed his eyes. "I'm coming home." The morning came slowly, as if the sky itself had been reluctant to move on from the night before. Soft gray light filtered through the motel window, blinds casting thin bars across the modest room. Ethan sat fully dressed at the small table near the window, a styrofoam cup of lukewarm motel coffee cooling beside him. He hadn't slept. Not really. but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. Outside traffic was minimal, just the occasional rumble of a pickup, the distant bark of a dog. Rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world smelling like earth and pavement. He looked down at the photo of Lily on the table. The ink had faded slightly, water damage softening the edges, but her smile had remained untouched, like a lighthouse refusing to dim. He reached for his phone again, stared at the screen. Her voice from the night before still echoed in his mind. Just one word. But it had undone him more than any battlefield ever had. A knock on the motel door broke the silence. He stood cautious but not tense, and opened it. The man standing outside was Sheriff Reed's mid-50s, barrel-chested with a thick gray mustache, and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen most things and still believed in justice. Mr. Walker Ethan gave a slow nod. "I believe we have some things to talk about," the sheriff said, tipping his hat politely. Back in town, Sarah was refilling coffee pots at the diner. The radio hummed in the background with old country hits. It was a slow morning, but not quiet. The door chimed open, and Anna rushed in, apron, untied hair still damp from the morning fog. "You won't believe what happened last night," she blurted out, breathless. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. A fight bigger. The sheriff's department arrested Troy and those other two guys. Said they were running narcotics upstate. Found stashes in their truck." Sarah froze. "What, yeah?" "Said they were tipped off anonymously, and get this, they already had a tracker on the truck. High-end tech, military grade." Sarah set the pot down slowly. It didn't take much to connect the dots. She glanced at the booth where Ethan had sat just the night before. Empty now, cleaned and reset. But his presence lingered like a note left in the air that Anna kept rambling. "I mean, can you imagine? All this time, we thought Troy was just a loudmouth. Turns out he was part of something big." Sarah didn't answer right away. She walked behind the counter, opened the drawer, and pulled out a small plastic pouch. Inside was a spare copy of Lily's photo. Ethan had left it behind accidentally. Or maybe not. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled. Back at the sheriff's office, Ethan stood near the window, while Sheriff Reeds flipped through a thin file. "You served with distinction," the sheriff said. "SEAL Team 2, Ethan replied. "You didn't mention that when you checked in last week. I didn't think it mattered." The sheriff looked up, held his gaze. "Well, it mattered last night." He set the file down and leaned forward. "My deputies found 2 kilograms of fentanyl under a false panel in the truck's bed. You placing that tracker helped us close a case we've been chasing for over a year." "I didn't do it for the case," Ethan said. "I did it because they crossed a line." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Doesn't matter why. You did the right thing. You saved lives." Ethan didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the bulletin board on the wall, photos of local events, missing dogs flyers for charity dinners. Normal life. "I don't want press or recognition," Ethan said firmly. "You won't get any reads," replied, half smiling. "But you'll get something better. Peace of mind." Ethan glanced at him. The sheriff added, "You headed somewhere, California," Ethan said, "to see someone I should have never left behind." Sheriff Reed extended a hand. "Well, Mr. Walker, thank you for showing us what quiet courage looks like." Ethan shook his hand. "Take care of your town, Sheriff." Reed smiled. "I think it just started taking care of itself again." By late morning, the sun had burned through the last of the fog. Ethan stood outside the diner, backpack slung over one shoulder. Before he could reach for the door, it opened. Sarah stood there, holding a small to-go bag and a fresh coffee cup. "Thought you might come back," she said. "I almost didn't." "But you did." He accepted the coffee with a nod. Inside the bag was a sandwich, a granola bar, and tucked between them a freshly laminated copy of Lily's photo. I figured, she said, this one might last longer. He looked down at the picture, then back at her. I didn't know people like you still existed, he said. She smiled. We do. We're just quieter now. He took a step back. Thank you, Sarah, for seeing me, even when I didn't want to be seen. She looked at him, eyes, soft voice, steady. Find her. And when you do, don't waste another second. He hesitated, then reached into his coat, pulled out a coin, old brass, polished. It bore the seal emblem on one side and an inscription on the other. The only easy day was yesterday. He placed it gently in her palm. A reminder, he said, that even quiet places deserve warriors. Sarah didn't speak, just nodded, her fingers closing around the coin. Ethan turned and walked down the street toward the station, his silhouette long in the morning sun. Not a hero, not a soldier, just a father, finally going home. The bell above the diner door chimed softer than usual as Ethan stepped inside. It had only been a day since the incident, since the bus stop, the confrontation, the quiet takedown that no one would talk about publicly, but everyone in town somehow knew. Yet, as he walked in, it felt like weeks had passed. The world moved differently when you were trying to begin again. The late-morning crowd had thinned, just two men nursing coffee at the far end, and an older couple sharing pancakes in the corner booth. Behind the counter, Sarah looked up from refilling the sugar containers. Her eyes widened, not in surprise, but in something gentler. Recognition. Relief. Back again, she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. Thought you'd be halfway across state lines by now. I lost something, Ethan replied, stepping closer. She tilted her head, half smiling. You lose a lot of things, don't you? His hand reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet, worn leather and fraying at the edges. I think I left this here. Yesterday. She took it, flipped it open, inspected the ID inside, then raised an eyebrow. Looks like you. Mostly. He glanced at her hands. She was still holding something else, a small laminated photo carefully pressed and tucked into a protective sleeve. Lily's photo. You laminated it, he said softly. I couldn't fix the one you had, she replied, but I could make sure this one lasts. He took it gently, his thumb brushing the corner, as if afraid to damage even the copy. Sarah leaned on the counter, her tone shifting. You're not like most men who pass through here. No, most of them talk too much. Ethan chuckled barely, but it was there. A warmth in the chest, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She gestured to the booth by the window. Coffee always. They sat across from one another, two people no longer strangers, but not yet friends. Something quieter, something waiting. The waitress brought 2 cups, but left them alone otherwise. Outside the window, the sun was brighter today. The sky a soft, forgiving blue. Sarah looked at him, not with pity, but with curiosity born of admiration. You gonna see her soon? Ethan nodded. I spoke to her, just briefly. She said she wants to meet this weekend. And you believe her? I have to. He looked out the window, then back. I want to walk into that moment. Clean. Not just in name, but in spirit. Sarah stirred her coffee slowly. What does that look like for a man like you? Ethan took a moment. His answer wasn't rehearsed. It means forgiving myself, he said. For missing things. For choosing war over birthdays. For not knowing how to come home when the battles ended. She listened without interrupting. I used to think silence was strength, but sometimes it's just fear. And I let that fear keep me away. Sarah's eyes softened. But you came back. I did. And that matters. Ethan looked down at his cup. Do you believe people can start over? I do, she said. But only if they stop punishing themselves for the version they used to be. Her words hung in the air like sunlight, through glass, gentle, warm, unflinching. He looked up at her, and for the first time, really looked not as someone passing through, but as someone trying to stay. "You speak like someone who's lived it," he said. "I have," she admitted. "My husband left 6 years ago. No goodbye, just gone. I stayed, raised 2 kids, worked 2 jobs, smiled every day for people who barely looked me in the eye. Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers. You deserve more." "So do you," she replied. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with mutual understanding, the kind that doesn't come from shame. Finally, Sarah reached into her apron and pulled out a folded napkin. She slid it across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Directions to the best motel in town. It's not fancy, but it's quiet, and it's run by a woman who doesn't ask questions." Ethan unfolded the napkin and read the scrawled handwriting. Below the address, she had written, "Be the kind of man she already thinks you are." His throat tightened. He tucked the napkin into his jacket. "I don't usually meet people like you," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. He stood slowly taking his coffee with him, then paused. "If I came back through town after all this, you'd find your coffee waiting," she said. "Maybe something more." He nodded, once the kind of nod that meant everything and nothing at the same time. As he turned to leave, Sarah called out one last time, "Ethan." He looked back. "Don't forget who you are when you walk into that room with her." "I won't," he said. "Because someone here just reminded me." The bell chimed behind him as the door closed. Sarah watched him walk down the street, the morning sun casting his shadow long and steady. The motel room was still. Only the ticking of the old wall clock broke the silence, counting seconds, as if trying to remind him that time, no matter how heavy, continued forward. Ethan sat at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped loosely between his knees. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across the room, one of them stretching from his figure to the wall like a tether, as if even light hesitated to get too close. He held a photo in his hands. Lily and her mother, Grace, standing on a pier, arms wrapped around each other, wind tossing their hair into laughter. He hadn't looked at this one in years. Not since it was a dusty afternoon in Kandahar. The air was dry and hot, and the base smelled like diesel and sunburned canvas. Ethan had just returned from a 72-hour recon operation. His uniform was still streaked with sweat dust and blood not his. He had barely removed his boots when his commanding officer walked in, eyes low, holding a sat phone. "Walker, it's your brother. Says it's urgent." Something in his gut turned before the phone even reached his hand. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Ethan, it's Grace. The car was hit. Drunk driver. She didn't make it." And then silence. No more details. No comfort. No time to grieve. Just static. And orders. Because within an hour he was back in the briefing room staring at satellite images, pretending his heart hadn't just been torn in half across 7,000 miles. He never made it to the funeral. Command said it would compromise the mission. He agreed, or at least pretended to. The guilt didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. Like water through a crack in concrete, slowly spreading, then freezing, then breaking. Back in the motel room, Ethan's fingers trembled as he touched Grace's face in the photo. "She deserved better," he whispered to the silence. And then came the voice, soft, high, innocent. Dad Ethan looked up, but there was no one there. Of course not. Just a memory. He closed his eyes. And there she was. Lily, age 5, running barefoot in the backyard, arms out like airplane wings, laughing her little legs, stumbling over grass as she chased the wind. Faster, Daddy. He remembered the way she used to crawl into bed after nightmares. The way she'd draw pictures of her family with stick figures, and always add a big yellow sun in the corner. The way she once cried because she thought the moon followed her home. He remembered everything except being there, because he wasn't. He was always gone. The phone calls got shorter. He'd try to talk to her, but she was growing, and he wasn't present for any of it. Then one day, he called and got no answer. Then another. And another. Her grandmother had taken over custody, said Lily needed stability, said Ethan should wait. Let time pass, maybe someday. That someday stretched into now. Back in the present, Ethan sat motionless in the silence of the room. The weight of those missed years sat in his chest like stone. He wasn't a bad man, but he had made bad choices. Not out of selfishness, but out of fear. The fear that he couldn't be enough. That war had shaped him too far too deep, that he would fail her again. So he chose absence, because it was safer. For her. For him. For the illusion that maybe one day he could return as someone better. But absence, he'd come to learn, wasn't protection. It was abandonment in disguise. Ethan rose slowly and walked to the sink. He splashed cold water on his face, gripping the sides of the porcelain as if it could anchor him. In the mirror, he saw a man aged not just by time, but by regret. And then, a knock at the door. His body tensed out of habit. He opened it and found a small envelope taped gently to the handle. No signature, just one line written in pen. You're not the man who left. You're the man who came back. S. Sarah. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He returned to the table, sat back down, and looked at Lily's photo once more, this time without turning away. Your dad is coming, he whispered. He's not perfect. He's late. But he's coming. And this time he meant it. Not as a wish, not as a maybe. The morning sun slanted through the thin motel curtains, casting a honeyed glow across the room. Dust motes floated gently in the light, like tiny reminders that time was always moving, even when hearts stood still. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, fully dressed, boots on, bag packed. But he wasn't leaving yet. In front of him on the small table lay his phone. Silent. He had checked it 12 times in the last hour. Not because he expected a call, but because he was afraid of one. It had been years since he heard her voice. Lily. And now the possibility that she might speak to him again, might want him back in her world, was both a miracle and a minefield. He reached for the phone, put it back, stood, sat again. He stared at the screen as if it might blink to life on its own. The motel was quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but loaded. And then, it rang, a single buzz, then another. Ethan froze. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Area code from California. His hand hovered. Another ring. Then, with a deep breath, he answered. Hello, he said. Voice rougher than he expected. There was a pause, a breath, then a voice, soft, uncertain. Is this Ethan Walker? He closed his eyes. It wasn't Lily, but it was someone connected to her. Yes, he said. This is Ethan. This is Elena. I'm Lily's grandmother. His shoulders stiffened. She continued, voice kind but cautious. She told me you called last night. Left a message. I did. There was another pause. Then she wants to speak with you. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. She does. Yes. I told her I'd call first. She's nervous. So am I. There was a sound, shuffling, murmuring. Then the faint click of a phone being passed. And then... Dad. The word wasn't a question this time. It was a memory waking up. He hadn't heard that voice since it was full of crayons and cartoons. But now, it was older. A little, but still hers. Still Lily. Ethan swallowed hard. Hi, baby. Another pause. Then I'm not a baby anymore. He smiled, tears already blurring his eyes. I know. I missed everything. You did, she said. Not cruelly, just honestly. I'm sorry, Lily, for all of it. I know, that was all she said. Not forgiveness, not anger, just truth. I want to see you, Ethan said. There was hesitation. And then carefully, Mom used to say, you were a hero, that you were out there saving people. I was trying, Ethan said. But I didn't save the one who mattered most. You still can, Lily whispered, if you want to. He leaned forward, pressing his hand against his eyes. I do. More than anything. There was a beat of silence. Then she asked, can you come this weekend? Grandma says she'll pick you up from the station. Ethan exhaled slowly. I'll be there, even if I have to walk. Lily laughed softly. The sound was fragile but real. Grandma drives too fast. He laughed too, a sound he hadn't made in years. I'll wear a seatbelt. Another pause. Then I gotta go. But I'm glad you called. Me too, he said. More than I can say. The line went quiet. The call ended. But the air in the room had changed. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was returning. Outside clouds had lifted completely. The air smelled like sunlight on concrete, clean and warm. Ethan stepped out of the motel room backpack over his shoulder. The world looked the same. But something in him had shifted. He walked 2 blocks to the diner, not for coffee, but for closure. Sarah was wiping down tables when he entered. She looked up and smiled, not out of politeness, but recognition. You look different, she said. I think I am, he replied. You got the call? He nodded. I leave in an hour. Sarah poured a coffee, handed it to him without asking. He took a sip. You were right. About starting over. She leaned on the counter, eyes searching his face. You ready for it? No. Ethan said, then smiled. But I'm going anyway. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper, her own number. Just in case you need someone to remind you you're not alone in this. Ethan took it, folded it gently. Thank you. For everything. You were never as invisible as you thought, Ethan. Some of us saw you, even when you didn't. He held her gaze a moment longer, then turned to go. At the door, he paused. I'll send a postcard. When I get there. You better, she said, her voice warm. He stepped into the light, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like too much. The bus was due in 20 minutes. Ethan stood outside the diner, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, boots planted firmly on the sun-warmed sidewalk. The late morning light painted everything gold, the awning above the windows, the chrome trim of the parked cars, even the chipped red letters on the front of the diner. Inside, Sarah was finishing up her shift. He could see her through the window, moving with the same quiet grace she always had, pouring coffee, smiling at customers, as if today were just another morning. But it wasn't. Not for either of them. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped outside, wiping her hands on a folded towel. Her hair was pulled back, but a few strands had come loose in the heat. She squinted against the sun, then smiled when she saw him. You sure you don't want lunch before you go? She asked. I'm sure, Ethan replied. If I eat now, I won't taste a thing when I see her. Sarah nodded, understanding more. There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Like both of them were aware of something important. Ending. Or maybe just changing. I have something for you, she said, reaching into the canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Ethan blinked. You didn't have to. I know I didn't. She pulled out a small folded scarf, navy blue, soft to the touch, worn but clean. It used to be my father's. He was a Navy mechanic, quiet man, strong, a lot like you. Ethan took it gently, fingers brushing across the fabric. I can't take this. You can. And you will, she said, voice firmer now. Because he wore it every time he came home from deployment. Said it reminded him he had something worth coming back to. Ethan looked down at the scarf, then up at her. "I don't know what to say." "You already did," she said. "When you didn't give up." He swallowed, trying to clear the lump in his throat. She stepped forward and reached up, slowly wrapping the scarf around his neck, a quiet, intimate gesture. Not romantic in the dramatic sense, but something deeper. Respect, affection, trust. When she finished, she let her hands rest briefly on his shoulders. "You've got this, Ethan." He looked at her, not as a stranger, not even as a friend, but as someone who had seen him at his worst and still believed he was worth saving. "You were the first person who made me feel visible again," he said. Sarah smiled. "You were never invisible, just waiting to be noticed by the right eyes." They stood there for a moment in the soft hum of the town, birds chirping, wind brushing through nearby trees, the distant cough of an old truck turning onto Main, and then the sound of air brakes. The bus. Ethan turned to look. It pulled into view, hissing to a stop at the corner, the same bench where this all began. He turned back to Sarah. "Guess that's my ride?" "Guess so." Neither of them moved right away. Then Ethan stepped forward and gently hugged her. She returned it without hesitation. No words, just warmth. When they pulled back, her eyes were glassy, but she didn't blink them away. He picked up his bag. "If I ever find myself passing through again, I'll keep a table open," she said, "and a fresh pot ready." Ethan chuckled softly. "I'll hold you to that." He took a few steps toward the bus, then paused, turned back. "Sarah." "Yeah, tell Anna. Thank you for not flinching that night." Sarah smiled. "She'll be proud you remembered." He nodded once, then boarded. Inside, the driver barely glanced up, just gave him a wave and returned to his paperback. Ethan found a seat near the back, dropped the bag at his feet, and sat. Out the window, Sarah was still standing on the curb watching. As the bus pulled away, she raised a hand. So did he. Their eyes held until the diner disappeared around the corner. As the bus rumbled down the highway, Ethan leaned his head against the glass, the scarf still warm around his neck. Outside, the trees passed in a blur of color, green, gold, blue sky above. He reached into his coat and pulled out the photo. Lily still smiling. He didn't cry. But something inside him, tight and wound for years, finally loosened. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man running from the past. He felt like a man heading home. The bus hissed as it came to a stop at the small depot on the edge of the California coast. The sky was wide and soft streaks of gold and lavender melting into one another above the ocean. A sea breeze moved gently through the palm trees, lining the lot, the scent of salt and sun baked into every breath. Ethan stepped down onto the pavement, his boots crunching softly on gravel. He paused, duffel slung over his shoulder scarf, still wrapped loosely around his neck. His heart wasn't pounding. It was simply there. Present. Awake. This was it. He scanned the parking area. There were a few people milling about, a couple hugging a driver checking his tires, a young woman on her phone. And then he saw her. She was standing near the far bench next to a small white SUV. She wore a light hoodie, jeans, and a hesitant expression. Her hair was longer now, chestnut brown with soft curls the way Grace used to wear it. She held a small dog in her arms. It was the same one from the photo, older now, grayer around the muzzle, but still with that floppy ear and two big eyes. Lily. Ethan's steps slowed. She saw him, didn't wave, didn't run. She just stared. He came to a stop a few feet away. Neither of them spoke. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. No noise, no time. Just two souls caught in a silence 5 years wide. Ethan let the bag slip from his shoulder. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice barely above the breeze. I wasn't sure you'd want me to, he replied. I didn't. For a long time. He nodded, accepting that without flinching. But then she continued. I realized I wasn't angry because you left. I was angry because I thought you'd forgotten. His throat tightened. I never forgot. The dog wiggled in her arms, sensing something. She set it down. It trotted up to Ethan, tail, wagging cautiously, sniffing at his boots. You remember me, he murmured, crouching to scratch behind its ear. The dog licked his hand. Lily watched her arms crossed loosely over her chest. You look older, she said. I feel it. You still walk like a soldier. I'm trying to stop. She almost smiled. Almost. He stood slowly. You've grown, he said. You haven't changed. I'm trying to. Lily shifted her weight. Do you still have the picture? He reached into his jacket, pulled out the laminated copy Sarah had made. I never let it out of my sight. She looked at it. It's not the same one. He nodded. The first one. Got a little weathered. She took a slow breath, eyes scanning his face. Then softly, I missed you. Even when I told myself I didn't, Ethan's voice cracked. I missed every moment. And then finally she stepped forward. Just a step. But it was everything. He opened his arms, uncertain. She hesitated, then moved into them, and hugged him. Not like a wounded child, but like a daughter who had built up walls only to find that the person on the other side had never stopped waiting. Ethan held her like the world depended on it, because for him it did. Her head rested against his chest. You smell like old jackets and bus stations. He chuckled through a tear. I'll take that. I don't know what this means yet, she said. I don't know how to feel. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to let me try. She nodded against him. The dog barked once, a high, cheerful sound. They both laughed. It was the first sound that later, they sat on the tailgate of the SUV, sharing a soda and letting the breeze wash over them. Lily spoke of school, of books, of music, of nothing in particular. Ethan listened like it was scripture. Did you ever want to come back sooner? She asked. Every day. Then why didn't you? I thought you were better off without me, he admitted. I didn't think I could be the man you needed. But you're here. I am. She handed him the soda. Then maybe that's a start. He looked out toward the water. Waves rolled in slow, soft forgiving. And for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Walker breathed. Without guilt. Just grace. The diner opened at 6:00 a.m., just like it always had. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of bacon sizzling on the flat top. Outside, the sky was still pink, with early light, and dew clung to the windows like breath on glass. Sarah moved through her morning routine, flipping chairs down from tables, refilling sugar containers, setting out the menus she knew by heart. It was a quiet day. No storms in the forecast. No bikers revving outside. No silent stranger at the bus stop across the road. But her eyes kept drifting to his booth, the one in the corner by the window. Empty now, but not forgotten. She didn't expect a letter. She certainly didn't expect a package. But when she unlocked the front door that morning, it was sitting there, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Just her name. Sarah Bennett. Diner on Main inside was a photograph. 2 people stood on a beach, a tall man, scarf fluttering gently around his neck, kneeling beside a teenage girl and a grinning, floppy-eared dog. Behind them, the sun was setting gold and crimson, spilling across the waves like fire made soft. They were both smiling. Really smiling. Not the kind that poses for cameras, the kind that happens when something broken finally begins to heal. Taped to the back was a single handwritten note. In careful, deliberate script, thank you. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. for reminding me that good men are allowed to come home, and for believing that a second chance doesn't have to come with permission, just courage. Lily says hi. Ethan Sarah read it twice, then once more, slower. She stood in silence for a long moment, holding the photo to her chest. Then she walked to the wall behind the counter, the one where regular snapshots, postcards, and Polaroids had accumulated over the years. She took down an old photo of a fishing trip and replaced it with Ethan's picture. Pinned just below it, she added a small wooden plaque, something she'd had carved months ago, but never hung unsure if it was too much. Now it felt right. It read, "Be kind. You never know who's sitting at your Customers came in later that morning. Some noticed the photo. Most didn't. But Sarah did. Every time she walked past that booth, she glanced at it. Just for a second. Just enough. Because she knew that some people pass through your life like a storm, loud, chaotic, unforgettable. And some they pass through like wind over tall grass, quiet, steady, and forever altering the landscape. Weeks later, a regular named Tommy, who worked nights at the gas station, pointed at the photo while paying for his coffee. "Who's that?" he asked. Sarah smiled. "Just a man who stopped running." Tommy nodded. "He looks like a soldier." "He was. Retired reborn," she said, pouring his change into his hand. Tommy raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. He left with his coffee, and Sarah turned back to her work. The same coffee pots, the same tables, the same view out the window. But everything felt a little different now, a little warmer, a little braver. Because somewhere out there, a girl had her father back, a dog had its beach, and a quiet man once lost to silence had finally come home. Before you go, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop us a comment and let us know your city, your story, or simply how this video made you feel. If this story touched your heart and you believe the world needs more kindness, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. We share tales that heal, inspire, and remind us all of the quiet strength within. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of a